Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now 9:08 p.m. in a very dark, as always, grim, depressing, and rather cold Central European city of Budapest, where spring seems nowhere to be found and doesn't seem to be much on the horizon, and where we have to put up with these very short, interminably short days. I don't know if one can say interminably short. Unbearably short days for at least another month. The clocks don't move forward until March the 29th, I think. But anyway, on a more cheerful note, welcome everybody to the Gaggle, the live stream on Tuesday night live stream. So thank you very much, everybody who has joined me. Really appreciate it. And obviously, there's a great deal to discuss and to disentangle from the events of the past few days. So, in terms of the what's really happening is on the one hand kind of surprising, but the full consequences are not yet readily apparent. So yesterday we had these dueling resolutions at the United Nations. As you know, there was the attempt by the Europeans and the Ukrainians to pass the standard issue UN General Assembly resolution condemning Russia and blah blah, demanding the restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. But what was surprising about that was that the United States really was demanded that resolution be withdrawn, and then it proposed a resolution of its own. Now, the General Assembly resolution, the one that the Ukrainians and the Europeans put forward, was adopted by the UN General Assembly, but only about 93 votes. So that's less than one half of the UN membership. But most stunning of all was that the United States and Russia voted against. That's the United States. The United States voted against this resolution demanding Russian withdrawal from Ukraine, the restoration of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The same resolutions that have been adopted now for the past 3 years. Voting for the resolution included Serbia. So remember, the United States has vetoed it. Oh no, well, voted against rather, not vetoed. Voted against, and as did Russia. China abstained. Serbia voted in favor. Now, subsequently, Serbia said that was a mistake. It was a mistake. Quite how one makes a mistake of that magnitude is a little bit surprising, because any country has a very extensive international relations department, a very expensive, large foreign ministry, and when you get big events like the 3-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, you kind of don't make mistakes there just to, well, we meant to veto or we meant to abstain, but in fact, sorry, we voted in favor. But anyway, China, as I say, China, the great U.S., the great Russian ally, a limitless partnership of whatever, China abstained. So U.S. voted against, Russia voted against, and China abstained. Then the the Americans put forward their own resolution, which was much more, had much more neutral language and much shorter. Obviously, there was a lack of verboseness. But what happened then was that there were a new number of amendments introduced into that uh, resolution by the Europeans, and the Americans, their own resolution. They said we're going to abstain, so they abstained on their own resolution because basically the Europeans had put in too many amendments. Serbia also abstained on this one. So that was in the General Assembly, and then the Americans introduced into the Security Council that same resolution, but then vetoed all of the amendments that were introduced by the various European members of the Security Council. So that resolution was Security Council resolution was adopted by 10 votes, and there were 5 abstentions. And of course, the abstentions included France and the United Kingdom. But voting in favor of the US Security Council resolution was Russia and China. So this was an extraordinary event. Here the Russians and the Americans voted in favor of the of a UN Security Council on Ukraine, and the General Assembly, at least as far as the first resolution, the one that was adopted, that was put forward by the Europeans and the Ukrainians, again the Americans and the Russians voted against. So that was quite a turnaround. But then we had the meeting in the White House between Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and President Trump, and that was, of course, very interesting because all the voices that we're getting from Europe that, well, we're going to continue. We're going to continue supporting Ukraine. We're just going to go ahead and do it. We don't really care what the Trump administration is saying. We're just going to go on giving Ukraine, just repeating the same mantra. We're going to give Ukraine whatever it needs. Now, at the same time, Trump is suggesting that a deal is really in the works. A peace deal between the United States and Russia is in the works. But there's a problem with that, which is, there are a couple of problems. In the first place, any deal that Trump has his mind on involves an immediate ceasefire. There's no question. There's no point in even arguing about this. It means a ceasefire on the current lines of contact, a ceasefire in the Donbass, a ceasefire in Kursk. There's no point in arguing about that. That's what Trump would demand. But of course, that's a bit of a problem for Russia, because of course Russia has not accomplished its goals in the southeast of Ukraine, because it hasn't fully secured Donetsk, it hasn't fully secured Kherson or Zaporozhye. Even Lugansk isn't fully under Russian control. At 98 or 99% of it is, but not all of it. So that's one problem. The other problem is, of course, in Kursk, because in Kursk, the Ukrainians still hold whatever 400 to 500 square kilometers of Kursk. Again, Russia hasn't succeeded in driving out the Ukrainians from Kursk. And again, it's going to be quite soon 7 months since the incursion, and we were all expecting it to be over by Tuesday afternoon, and it didn't happen. So 7 months are still there. I mean, they're occupying much less land than they were originally, but they still got, as I say, 400 to 500 square kilometers of territory in Kursk. So any ceasefire would have to be everyone stays in place. So that's one problem for the Russians. But the other problem is that Ukraine and the Europeans are not on board for this. They're not interested in bringing it to an end. They want to continue with this war. However terrible, horrifying, they want to just continue with it. They would just want to go on with the same Biden-Blinken war that's been so devastating. Now, in those circumstances, of course, that does work to Russia's advantage, because then Russia can withstand the pressure from Trump, because Trump, who wants this deal done now, and he's making very positive statements about Russia, including, as I say, I mean, they're on the same side in the United Nations, but the General Assembly on the same side, and in the Security Council. So the Americans are saying, look, we're going over and above what's expected of us. We're trying to help you. We want to get rid of these one-sided resolutions. But no, we don't want to sign on to anything that blames Russia for this war. So you can't complain. We're trying to go the extra mile to see the war from your perspective. But we want something in return. So this is the important thing, that the Americans want something in return from Russia. What do they want in return from Russia? They want the war to come to an end. If Russia then says, well, hey, we can't bring it to an end because we haven't accomplished our goals, well, then Trump is going to turn around and say, well, you've had 3 years to accomplish your goals. I wasn't here for 3 years. Now I'm here. You've had 3 years. No one was stopping you from accomplishing your goals. But now that's it. The party's over. It's time to bring it to an end. But at this stage, the Russians can turn around and say, well, how can we stop? How can we agree to a ceasefire when Ukraine hasn't agreed to a ceasefire? When the Europeans haven't agreed to a ceasefire, they want to continue fighting. Well, we can't just simply stop firing, our artillery if they're still firing artillery at us. So that works to Russia's advantage. But Macron, when he came to Washington, seemed to be saying something very different. He said that, I support Trump's peace initiative. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. What Trump is doing is absolutely right. However, there have to be security guarantees. He didn't quite spell out what he meant by security guarantees, because of course security guarantees mean that you're ready to go to war on somebody's behalf. It's a security guarantee. In other words, if you come under attack again, we're going to go in to go and fight on your behalf. I mean, that's what a security guarantee is. I mean, otherwise it's nothing. I mean, if you say, well, if you come under attack, maybe we'll think about it, consult, with one another, and then think about the response. That's not a guarantee. So that's the implication of what Macron was saying. But Macron then went beyond that and said, well, we can only provide the security guarantees if the Americans are on board, and that's of course correct. I mean, if you're going to bring in um, Europeans as security guarantors, they don't have the capability of of any kind of major logistical operation, the airlift capability of bringing them into Ukraine. The air defenses that are necessary, the anti missile systems that are necessary. The aircraft defense and so on. I mean, this is a big military operation if you're going to put them in to harm's way. Now, Macron said that we're going to keep our forces not on the front line; they'll be more as backup. And now Trump said, "Yeah, I don't really, I think I talked to the Russians, and the Russians said they don't have a problem with having European peacekeepers." Now, this has been the point that the Europeans, and particularly the French, and it goes for Starmer as well. They've been using terms like peacekeeper and and security guarantors, basically, interchangeably. And of course, it's led to confusion. So, what does that mean? I mean, if you think about what is a peacekeeper, the whole point of a peacekeeper is that they are neutral parties. They're not on anybody's They're not on anybody's side. They are there to observe that the peace is being kept. They're not in any way combatants. They cannot be in any way combatants. They're just there to ensure that that the peace is being kept. They cannot they can't start shooting at anyone or anything like that. Now the problem right away is that the Europeans, the French and the British, cannot by any stretch of the imagination be described as neutral. So if they are introduced into Ukraine, as peacekeepers, then obviously they are there as allies of Ukraine. And then if you start talking about, oh well, they provide the security guarantee, then it sounds like they are there in order to provoke a war. Because after all, if they're there, and then and the way Macron defined it, well, Minsk agreements failed because there were no security guarantees for Ukraine, and therefore Russia violated Minsk. Of course, it's an absolute lie, because the violation of Minsk was from the Ukrainians, the Kiev side, because they continued firing and shooting artillery at their own people in the Donbass, and they didn't implement the parts of the Minsk agreement, which was the constitutional amendment to give Donetsk and Lugansk special status within Ukraine. That was never accomplished. But Macron just simply said during the news conference, oh, it was the Russians who violated Minsk, and the reason they violated Minsk was that there were no security guarantees in Minsk. So this was really, this is a very troubling reading of what happened. So, because what he's now doing is by saying security guarantors, peacekeepers, is that he's trying to bring in NATO, essentially NATO forces. He's talking about the French and the British going in. Now, the Germans have so far been reluctant, but with this new government, with Merz and the likely top social democrat in this coalition, this Boris Pistorius, they're all much more hawkish than Scholz was. They may well agree to send in these so-called security guarantors into Ukraine. Now, what would they be doing in Ukraine? Well, they would be there essentially, to provoke and provide cover for Ukraine. So, in other words, at any time, Ukraine can violate any peace deal, which will provoke a retaliation from the Russians, and then, of course, the French and the British will scream, "Russia is violating the agreement, and our security commitments must come into play." Now, the only way that that can work is if the Americans are on board. And that's really what's going on now, because what the British, and Starmer is coming to Washington on Thursday. What the British and the French are doing is to get the Americans committed to this, to being a security guarantor. Because once they get a security guarantor, then they can actually get the war going and provide, this a phony, baloney rationale that it was Russia that violated the peace agreement. I mean, if Macron can outright lie, as he did at the news conference, that it was Russia that violated the Minsk Accords, total lie, absolute, brazen lie. If he can do that, then absolutely they can do that. Then they're going to seek to provoke Russia, and then when Russia responds to the provocation, they can say, "Oh, Russia is violating the agreement," and the lapdog media will, of course, just repeat it. I mean, even as you watch the media, I mean, it's just 24/7 kind of anti-Russian hysteria. And that's the goal that they have now. Trump has so far he didn't really respond to what Macron was saying. He was being kind of friendly and courteous and being a good host, but he didn't deny. He didn't in any way challenge what Macron was saying. That this was a plan. This is a plan being cooked up by the British and the French and the Germans and probably the Italians, and then, of course, all the hangers-on, the various Baltic states and the rest of them, to get America committed to war on Ukraine's behalf. And this is the problem, that unless Trump kind of really cuts this off immediately, then I think this is going to end in disaster. But the problem is the way the Europeans are playing it is that they're suggesting, well, if we don't get the security guarantees into the agreement, that's it, the security guarantee. If we don't get the security guarantees into the agreement, we're just going to continue this war. And of course, if they continue this war, then of course Russia will continue this war, because Russia's not just going to stop fighting just because Trump wants them to stop fighting. Now, the other interesting aspect of this, and this is again being very cleverly, Trump is being very cleverly played, which is that they trying to get Trump inextricably linked with Ukraine's economic development. Hence, this minerals, oil, gas, whatever deal that apparently is on the brink of being signed. And the agreement is quite interesting. I mean, apparently Ukraine has agreed. That's the latest news, that Ukraine has agreed to sign, and we haven't actually seen the deal, but a draft of it was leaked, and I just want to show the draft that I've seen. Again, I can't vouch for its accuracy, but let's see if I can. Let me hold a second. this is always very difficult here on. Okay, so the presentation. Okay, so let me see if I can do this. This the I think this is it. I think. So yeah, so this is the this is the draft. Oh God, this is kind of hard to see. I thought. All right. I thought it magnified it, but now it's Let's see if I can. Um, let's see if I can maybe see it. All right. Let's try again. Zoom is so much easier than Rumble. Um, Nope, this is as best as I can get. And so here we have blah blah. Whereas the United States has provided significant financial and material support to Ukraine, blah blah. Whereas the American people desire to invest alongside Ukraine in a free, sovereign, and secure Ukraine. Whereas the United States and Ukraine desire a lasting peace in Ukraine and a durable partnership between their people. And then this says, for instance, whereas the United States and Ukraine recognize the contribution that Ukraine has made to strengthening international peace and security by voluntarily abandoning the world's third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. Again, this is very misleading. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not quite as bad as the usual nonsense whereby Ukraine, gave up its nuclear weapons and so on. Here, this says they abandoned the world's third largest nuclear arsenal, but of course they didn't abandon anything because they never had control over the nuclear arsenal. I've talked about this many times. This was always under the command and control of the Soviet forces, and that means that they were under the command and control of Russia's forces. So Ukraine never had any control over those nuclear weapons. It's like saying Belgium, is a nuclear power, or Turkey is a nuclear power. It's nonsense. Anyway, and then it goes on. Whereas the United States and Ukraine wish to ensure that those states and other persons that have acted adversely to Ukraine in the conflict do not benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine following a lasting peace. Well, I assume that the reference is to Russia primarily, and maybe Belarus as well. But it's hard to see how the United States and Ukraine are going to prevent Russia from benefiting. I mean, whatever happens in the territory controlled by Russia, I mean, Russia will be benefiting. And then anyway, they propose this creation of a reconstruction investment fund to deepen the partnership between the United States and Ukraine. And so this is anyway this reconstruction investment fund, in which the United States maintains a 100% financial interest. Ukraine and the United States will equally co-manage the fund to advance the economic value associated with the resources of Ukraine, including but not limited to mineral resources, oil and gas resources. So that's important. I mean, we don't want to get hung up on this whole thing about the rare earths. I mean, I'm sick to death of people going on about the rare earths. As if it's not about the rare earths. It's about mineral, oil, and gas resources. It's not about the rare earths. And then it says there, and infrastructure and ports until the fund is fully funded. So the thing that the way it's going to work is that the Americans initially put up the money into this investment fund, and then the 50% of revenues that the United States claims from Ukraine. I mean, the United States doesn't just pocket it. The 50% of the revenues will go into this investment fund until it's fully funded. And I don't know what they call until they reach this $500 billion mark. And then, anyway, the fund will be established to collect and reinvest the revenues minus actual operating expenses, contribute to the fund during the period of defending, reconstructing, and returning Ukraine to its year end 2021 GDP. The fund will earn income from Ukrainian sources, including but not limited to deposits of minerals, hydrocarbons, and other extractable materials, and all natural assets and infrastructure and ports, as may be further described in the fund agreement. So again, as I say, very, very important, and let's stop this nonsense about the rare earths. I mean, people, have got themselves, in their knickers in a twist about, oh, well, there's so much rare earth or whatever rare earths are, and it's all in the Russian control. It's not about the rare earths. It's just nothing, it just somebody just said this, and then, everybody just kept repeating it as if, oh, there's no rare earths. Anyway, the government of Ukraine will contribute to the fund 50% of the revenue minus actual operating expenses earned from Ukrainian sources, including blah, blah, again, the mineral. And then the final agreement will provide that the contributions to the fund by the government of Ukraine will continue until the contributions reach the sum of 500 billion. So it reaches 500 billion, but I don't know. Well, anyway, they have to put a 50% of the revenue from all of these extractions. But the important thing is that as far as this agreement goes, this is only on future investment. So all current investment, all current extraction projects will not be going into this fund. So this is only about future projects. And again, as I've said, on previous podcasts, 50% is a very good deal. It's it's as good a deal as anyone gets when the Americans come in and start digging up the oil or whatever. So 50% is what you get if you're lucky. The fund agreement will separately provide that the government of Ukraine will additionally contribute to the fund a sum equal to twice the amount that the United States provides to Ukraine after the date of the agreement. To that end, the government of the United States intends to provide a long-term financial commitment to the development of a stable and economically prosperous Ukraine. Such potential further contributions shall be detailed in the fund agreement. Okay, and then it says the fund's operating profits distribution mechanism also designed to invest in projects in Ukraine and attract investments to increase development, and so on. And then the distribution mechanism will blah blah. See if there's anything else. And the fund agreement will include appropriate representation, blah blah. Third parties. The final agreement will provide acknowledgement, blah blah blah. The fund agreement will pay. The text of it will be developed on the government Department of Treasury. Is that it? Yeah. The fund agreement will pay particular attention to control by the tax of blah blah blah. The bilateral will make concrete to establish lasting peace. And I mean, because the bilateral agreement and the aforementioned fund agreement will constitute integral elements of the architecture of bilateral and multilateral agreements, as well as concrete steps to establish lasting peace and strengthen economic resilience. The United States intends to work with Ukraine to identify any necessary steps to protect mutual investments as defined in the fund agreement, and so on. Now, the reason it was worth looking at that, I mean, there are people who are very, very enthusiastic about this. That's not because they want America to make a ton of money, but they think that this anchors the United States in Ukraine, and that once the United States realizes, hey, there's money to be had, there's big, big bucks to be made here, then essentially the United States will have made this long-term contribution to Ukraine and that in effect will serve as a security guarantee for Ukraine, even though the term security guarantee is not mentioned. There's no mention in this agreement about a security guarantee. Now, I this is all highly speculative. This is just an agreement. However, there's Boris Johnson was jumping up and down with excitement about this deal, and Macron was very enthusiastic about this deal because they all see this as a way of locking the United States in to Ukraine. And remember, this whole thing about this investments, this big money to be made in Ukraine. This was originally conceived by Zelensky. Zelensky came up with this when he presented his victory plan. He said, "Hey, you can make a lot of money here. You can come up with these investment projects." And one other aspect that Zelensky offered in his victory plan was the using Ukrainian armed forces as part of the sort of NATO defenses within Europe. Hey, we're Ukrainians. We've been fighting this war. We've become quite good at fighting this war, um, and and so is that. Now, this is clearly that, again, you got to keep in mind, this is not about rare earths. Stop, everyone just stop talking about rare earths. That's not about rare earths. You saw that it's about all kinds of mineral extraction, including oil and hydrocarbons, port infrastructure. They're talking about major investments in Ukraine. Now, I have to say, the one person who's been very smart about this has been Steve Bannon. And Bannon said, "Yes, walk away." I mean, again, Bannon is a big Trump fan, but he gave this advice: walk away. Don't get involved in this. Don't start signing any kind of agreements, because this is a trap. This is a quagmire. The Europeans are very, very crafty. They always kind of think about very elaborate plans to ensnare the Americans in their projects. And this thing is that's why they're all very keen on this. Hey, look! I mean, this is a lot of money. If you're gonna start sinking money in various projects, you're gonna lose it. The Russians are gonna walk away with it. Now, Putin himself responded by offering the Americans investment opportunities in Russia. He said, "Well, we got a lot of rare earths in Russia, all over, and you're absolutely welcome to work with us to extract these rare earths." And they're difficult to extract because they are very capital intensive. It's a lot of so you have to sink an awful lot of capital in. And he also brought up the issue of aluminum. We got plenty of aluminum here. Aluminum, very important element, and you can come and help extract aluminum here in Russia. So he's kind of taking seriously Trump's economic interests in Ukraine, and he's saying, "Hey, if you think Ukraine has resources that's going to make you money, come to Russia, and we have even more resources." This, of course, is somewhat of a problem because Russia really had a bad experience with Western capitalists coming in, vowing to extract resources from Russia. They came in the 80s and 90s in the Gorbachev Yeltsin era, and they basically robbed the country blind. They it was absolute looting, and in fact, Putin's real main claim to fame, and how Putin built up his reputation, was the crackdown on these these foreign extraction agreements, and basically these foreign investors were basically buying up Russia's precious resources. So again, this would be a problem if you start doing deals with Trump to come. Oh yeah, come and get the aluminum. Oh yeah, yeah, come and get these rare earths. You're undercutting your own your claim to to being Russia's strongman. Preserving your sovereign assets. So we got all these things are still up in the air. And we got to think about them. If this agreement is signed, and it looks like it's going to be signed, then I think that there's a real peril there, in terms of peace, because then it'll get remember, Trump is a very mercurial person. Yeah, he's. I mean, he first of all says, I mean, that with Ukraine, oh yeah, yeah, Ukraine's really responsible for this war. Then he kind of changed his view and said, "Oh well, that it was Russia that started the war, but Ukraine should have done more to stop this." So he's expressing his exasperation with Zelensky, but he's signing this agreement. I mean, if you say that these people are utter shits, that you don't want to deal with them, then but why are you signing this agreement? This is an agreement for future investments, future projects. Whereas your main task at this stage should be trying to get a peace agreement. And to get the peace agreement, because I think he's got the Russians are on board. I think the Russians are ready to sign an agreement. And again, it's obvious Russia wants to bring this war to an end. I mean, this has been, it's been a horrific war. So the Russians, I think, really want to bring this thing to an end, and that's why they're ready to work with Trump to bring it to an end. The problem is that Ukraine doesn't want to bring it to an end. That Kiev doesn't want to bring it to an end. The Europeans don't want to bring it to an end. So what Trump really needs to do now is to start applying this pressure against the Europeans. I mean, basically saying, look, you've got to get with the program, or and if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to support an immediate ceasefire, you just want to again keep plowing all those resources into Ukraine, then he's got to get tough with the Europeans. Basically, he's going to say, okay, right, we're not going to give anything, nothing, absolute zero. We're not giving anything to Ukraine, and we're going to start hitting you with all kinds of tariffs. We're going to really make life miserable for you. In other words, he's going to absolutely apply pressure on the Europeans to knock it off. Stop with this. We're going to keep this war going. So because he is going to say, no, if you intend to keep this war going, we're not going to provide anything, nothing. And we're going to start hitting you with tariffs. He's been using tariffs, quite vigorously. Now's the time to apply the tariffs against the Europeans, and telling them that they need to get with the program to bring this to an end. Because if he doesn't do that, he is going to quite quickly get sucked into the war. However much he doesn't want to, he's going to get sucked in. He's going to get with this agreement on extracting the minerals and petrochemicals and whatever. And then he's going to get sucked in with discussions about security guarantees and so on. And that's all that the Europeans want to do. They want to keep this going, keep um, all these negotiations and debates, or what's a peacekeeper, what's a security guarantor, and that's the plan. And so otherwise, and so the clearly the Trump plan, and he has come in with a plan, is the Trump plan to bring this thing to an end, would just simply evaporate, as did his plan in during his first term to improve relations with Russia, which and he made some effort to do it, but he was sidetracked. He was sidetracked by RussiaGate, and in the end, he got himself absolutely befuddled by the British. And this was an amazing thing, because he knew that the British had plotted against him, that the British, through Christopher Steele, the dossier, and through, at the much more senior level at MI6, had plotted with the CIA to destroy him. He knew this. And yet, even though he had known this, he still allowed Theresa May to befuddle him with her nonsensical claims about Novichok and the poisoning of the Skripals. I mean, the very same people who had tried to destroy him, then came up with this ridiculous story that this deadliest of all nerve gases had been used on the Skripal, failed to kill them. But nonetheless, the United States has to respond against the Russians, and he did. He expelled, I think it was altogether 60 diplomats. He expelled 60 diplomats from the United States, and including, I think, from the United Nations, which I'm not at all sure the United States has the legal authority to expel diplomats who are accredited to the United Nations. And he did it, and it was the British. The British came up a story that was patently fraudulent. It was obviously a ludicrous story, undoubtedly perpetrated because the British and the CIA were determined to sabotage any possible improvement of relations with Russia. This happened in 2018. At the time when Trump was really, had this meeting in Helsinki, when Trump was actually determined to work on some new agreement with the Russians, and then there was the summit in Helsinki, and then boom, they have this ridiculous nonsense with the Skripals, and then in comes Gina Haspel, the head of the CIA at the time, who briefs Trump, and said that this nerve gas, this Novichok, that was used to attempt to kill the Skripals, even though the Skripals were not killed, it killed ducks. All these ducks died because of the Novichok. And that got Trump, he got upset. What with ducks? Oh, that's terrible. Just like in Syria, oh, these babies, that's terrible. We've got these beautiful babies, those beautiful ducks. I like ducks. And I was like, and so he allowed himself to be befuddled by the British, the very British who had tried to destroy him. Same people, absolutely the same people, exactly the same people. So he managed to get himself fooled by them. So something similar could well be in the works. I mean, I think we could see what Macron was doing yesterday. at the White House. I mean, it was clearly he was doing a number. He was clearly manipulating Trump, pretending that he was on board with the Trump peace initiative. Yeah, absolutely right. I support the peace initiative, but but we have to have the security guarantees. We can't do the security guarantees. And then and he was telling Trump again. He was telling Trump, well, that reason Minsk didn't work. The reason Minsk didn't work is that there were no security guarantees. And therefore the Russians were able to do what they could because there were no security guarantees. Um, and then, of course, the next question was, all right, so you provide the security guarantees, fine, go ahead. Send your forces in there and see what happens. But then he said, oh, well, we have to have support from the Americans. And then Macron, during the news conference, asserted, though there was no evidence for that, but nonetheless he asserted that Trump had agreed to provide help for the security guarantors, which were the Europeans. So I mean, this ridiculous position, which is the security guarantees, is coming from belligerents. These are the belligerents. These aren't neutral observers. They are belligerents, and they are belligerents whose goal is to keep this war going. That's what they're doing. I mean, they're open about it. They want to keep this war going. That's the whole purpose of these security guarantors is, hey, we got to keep this war going. And so Trump has agreed to. Now Trump didn't agree to supporting these security guarantors, though he did say falsely. He did say this falsely, that the Russians had accepted the presence of the Europeans as, quote, peacekeepers, unquote. This, of course, was untrue, because in fact it's the opposite that's the case, because Lavrov had said that that they wouldn't accept Europeans, whether they're there under the NATO flag, or they're not under the NATO flag, but they're not going to accept them. And of course, that's absolutely right. They can't accept them because they're there for the sole purpose of provoking a war. So the problem then is that this could have been a moment when Trump could start applying pressure on the Europeans. He's got the Russians have said, yeah, we're down, we're happy to cooperate with you on bringing this war to an end. Then the Europeans responded, oh, no, we can't bring it to an end. We're going to keep it going. No, this is terrible. This is ridiculous. Can't bring it to an end. And including this new German chancellor, this likely new chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who's actually saying, oh, well, we'll distance ourselves from the Americans. We have step by step, we distance ourselves from the Americans. Why? Because we're going to help the Ukrainians. That's it. That's the reason why he wants to distance himself from the Americans, because we care more about the Ukrainians than the Americans do. What Trump needs to do now is absolutely apply pressure on the Europeans, because they're now the obvious obstacle to this to bringing this war to an end. They want to keep this war going. Zelensky's their creature. He wants to keep this going, and now they're figuring out what ways they can manipulate the United States in order to support this war. Anyway, let's take a look at the Gaggle locals page, where the Gagglers, the people who care about the dogs and the hard times that they give me, because they're always complaining about my lack of contributions to the maintenance of the Gaggle, and then when they heard about the Elon Musk email, like what did you do? What name 5 points that you did over the past week? They got very excited and said, yeah, 5 points of what you did over the past 7 days. So, but thank you everybody who have made the donations just to keep the dogs away for just a little while longer. Thank you, Danaki. Welcome, Danaki says, Kedvesh George, dear George, why is it that each and every major nomination or appointment of Trump's has as their main goal or dearest cause, first and foremost, Israel and the defense of Israel? It's getting pathological already at this point. I wish I knew the answer to this question. It's very, very interesting how that even those members of the Trump entourage who are who are not neocons, who are not neocons by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, and I'm not talking here about creeps like Sebastian Gorka, or people who were neocons in the past, like like Mike Waltz or Marco Rubio, whatever their position now is. But in the past, they were pretty standard issue neocons, but those who are undoubtedly America firsters, who really do believe in make America great again and so on, which means essentially we put American interests first, American people first. We're not going to do all that stuff that we used to do, which is getting involved in foreign wars and placing the interests of other countries above those of our own. And so even those people, like even somebody like Steve Bannon, when it comes to Israel, they just go gaga, and then they say, hey, how could you support arming this terrible state? And not only is it you arming this terrible state and all the cruelty that they are subjecting the people in the occupied territories, not only this cruelty, but through their activities, they're clearly endangering the United States. Because through their activities, they're whipping up hatred towards the United States on the part of billions of Muslims around the world. So then it's not in any way a good deal for the United States. I mean, the United States has clearly allies in the Middle East, countries that they want to work with the Americans. But Israel is in the way, and the United States refuses to do anything to force Israel to adhere to the very international agreements that the United States pretends to adhere to, like namely the two-state solution, or the UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 338, and all the resolutions about Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories. So just that, which is still the official U.S. position. So even so, given how detrimental that is to the interests of the United States, so somebody like Steve Bannon is still, adopts the most extreme position on Israel. When it comes to Israel, the only people who come on are these absolute nutcase Likudniks. People like Caroline Glick, horrific woman. It was just, it was just horrific just listening to them. Or Hazoni, this fraud Hazoni, kind of who created this idea of nationalism. And so I don't fully know. We can put forward all kinds of different hypotheses, but it's not clear why America firsters. As I say, this is somebody who wants Trump to walk away from Ukraine now. Just walk away. Don't sign any agreements. Do nothing. Just walk away. and like Marjorie Taylor Greene, walk away. Um, but they embrace this cause of Israel. But you don't want to walk away from that. Despite all that the terrible consequences for the United States, you don't want to walk away from that. So it's yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's a betrayal without question of America first. You say it's America first, but it's not America first. It's not America first because you're putting the interests of Israel above those of America. Anyway, W. Baker says it's been pathological since Kennedy and Nixon, when the Vietnam War broke the country and Nixon had to take us off the gold standard because of French demands. The petrol and thus offshore dollar market was effectively created. Effectively, the U.S. opened all of its financial veins to the world. If it could keep its heart reserve currency, so many more financial avenues to control Washington politics. Yeah, I think obviously, that's no question. The money that's pouring in for the Israel lobby, but that in itself doesn't entirely explain the particular grip that Israel has on America's imagination. Um, you got people like Bannon. Bannon, he doesn't get money from Israel, but you got a lot of people. They absolutely um, swallow hook, line, and sinker the story of Israel, this victim. They swallow hook, line, and sinker that all of the Arabs are anti-Semites, that they want to drive the Jews into the sea, that they want to commit another Holocaust. You know exactly what the thing. They buy into this. And they believe this. This isn't just simply, oh yeah, there's big money involved. I mean, yeah, of course there is big money. And any politician who departs from the Israel approved script, APAC approved script, will be very swiftly primaried and destroyed. But not entirely. I mean, it worked sometimes. But look at Thomas Massey. Thomas Massey came under a lot of attack, but he's survived. So you can survive, but no question. This has enormous. This Israeli money is very powerful, uh, but the and when you look at the professions, you've got the legal profession. The legal profession is very powerful in the United States. Legal profession in the United States, as it is in many parts of the world, is dominated by Jews. So that's already a very important part of the big Israel lobby, and in the media again, enormous influence of Jews in the media. Interestingly enough, where the Jews don't really dominate is the universities, and that's why I think the universities have come under so much pressure from the U.S. government, precisely because the university is one of the few places where there is actually quite extensive criticism of Israel, and that's why the Congress and the administrations have all threatened the universities to try to bring them into line. But that's because the university is pretty much one of the few institutions that is not controlled by the Zionist lobby. And Ivan Grozny, always very good to see you. And it says, good evening, George. I've got two questions today. Good. Okay. Curious if you and Peter have ever met in real life or would ever make an in-person episode. Also, how successful do you think Doge cuts will be? So the answer is that Yeah, Peter and I have never met in real life. We came close to meeting last year. About a year ago, I was invited to come to Moscow for a conference, but they didn't. I couldn't get a visa in time. I mean, again, the Russians are not the most efficient of people, but the visa didn't come through, so I wasn't able to come. But I did think that if we do meet up, and that's what I suggested that to Peter, that if we do meet up, then we should do an in-person a conversation. I don't know how easy that would be. I mean, you may need a camera or something like that. But I did think that we would try to do that. But unfortunately, it didn't come about. But I was really looking forward to that trip. So that was about a year ago. Now the other question: how successful do you think Doge cards will be? I think they will be successful um, up to a point. I mean, obviously, there'll be things that are going to be slashed. Clearly, USAID is a juicy one, um, and I think that there will be some cuts. I think even in the Pentagon and so on. However, I still have to believe that the this massive bureaucracy will fight back. I mean, it's in the nature of the beast that they will resist being slashed. I mean, they're going to just fight back and say, hey, no, we want not only everything that was appropriated for us last year, but we want even more for the coming year. And the current response, I mean, I found it rather disappointing to Musk's email, which is, hey, can you list the 5 things that you accomplished last week and provide a response by whatever it was, midnight on Monday. And if you don't respond, you're gone. I mean, it was obviously somewhat of an overstretch, but nonetheless, the fact that so many departments and agencies actually resisted Musk and have not complied, and seemingly they have no intention of complying, including supposed adherents of MAGA, such as Tulsi Gabbard, you know, Bobby Kennedy Jr., and even Pete Hegseth, Rubio. They're not complying with this demand by Musk. I mean, I think it was always a bit of an overstretching on Musk's part. Nonetheless, there should have been more pressure on compliance. Whether you can fire people, I doubt whether you can just fire people. In fact, I'm pretty sure you can't just fire people with just because they don't respond to this email. And I don't think Musk has the power to fire people. But nonetheless, there should have been more. I don't think they should have said, "Hey, don't bother complying. Don't bother replying to this email." I don't think that was the right thing. So, I tend to be a little bit pessimistic as to how extensive these cuts will be. But I mean, but at the very least, they're making an effort, and that's more than anybody has done. I mean, if you go back to the Reagan era, if you go back to Newt Gingrich, I'm thinking two political figures who promised to make cuts in the federal government. Neither really did anything very much. Reagan promised to end the Department of Education, which at the time shouldn't have been that difficult because it had only been established a few years earlier by Jimmy Carter. So it shouldn't be that difficult to end the Department of Education, and really there was no particular need for it because education had always been a local issue. It's you don't really need a federal Department of Education. But even that, Reagan didn't do, and then Gingrich didn't really do anything. I mean, Gingrich promised to end Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Gingrich promised, I think, to end the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities. He didn't do any of that. So at least Doge and Trump seem to be making an effort. But I'm a little skeptical as to how far they're actually going to go. So, I mean, I think it's just there's so much inertia and there's going to be so much resistance to cuts. So, anyway, then we have Marx 2023 says, George, I take issue with you calling Russian citizens who sign a contract with the army mercenaries. Non-Russian citizens who sign up are mercenaries. Hopefully you clear that up. I don't think so. I think it's mercenaries exactly right. I mean, I think they are essentially doing this for the money. I mean, that's what you do. I mean, you pay people a sum of money, and then they sign up. I mean, I think that's what a mercenary is. I don't see any. Mercenaries don't necessarily have to be foreign. I mean, it's essentially is people who fight for money. I mean, that's it, and they get it's a big lump sum that they get paid for signing up, and so it's not like a signing up. Hey, we want all Russian patriots to come and come and fight for our cause. You're just saying, well, come and fight, and we'll give you a big lump sum of money. So they're coming up with the signing for the lump sum of money. So I don't think I'm being in any way unreasonably calling it a mercenary. I mean, that's fine. I don't have a problem with mercenaries, but that is what that's what they are. I mean, so and again, I don't. I say that's all perfectly fine. So I mean, I say the same thing about Americans who sign up. They get all sorts of very, very generous benefits, and it's done deliberately because you're taking your life in your hands, and therefore they're giving you all kinds of things that nobody else would be getting. Now, in the case of Americans, I mean, not only are they getting a big, quite a generous pay, but they're going to get free university education. And they can get into free university education in the best colleges, and then after that they can waltz into any job. They get this is part of the benefits that you get, which is boom, you're a veteran, you go to the front of the line. So that as opposed to a levée en masse, which is that everybody signs up for the greatness of the nation. No, I mean here you're signing up, and you're getting in return you're getting all sorts of financial benefits. So I don't see any problem there. Anyway, Kick 567 says, until Americans deal with the JQ question, America will never be free. So that brings me to the point I heard Colonel McGregor say, the words of Henry Ford, it's the international Jew cabal. Until the USG kills off APAC, American people in the world will be treated as servant slaves worthy of sacrifice, like abortion, for example. Israeli Jews don't abort their minions, blah blah. So, well, I think one can say that I mean they obviously when it comes to the question of Israel and where that's led the United States. I mean, there's obviously the influence of AIPAC. There's the influence of prominent Jews in American life, but there's also others. The Christian Zionists. That's clearly a strand of thought in the United States. And again, many of the most fervent advocates on behalf of Israel are themselves not Jews. All the various Sean Hannity's and all the Fox talking heads. Most of them are not Jews. And by the same token, I'd have to say that the most articulate opponents of Israel and Israeli policies and Zionism as a whole, Zionism as a whole, the Zionist project as a whole, are themselves Jews. Whether we're talking about Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, Aaron Maté, Max Blumenthal. I mean, we can just go through it. They are um, they're Jews, but they are the most articulate and most effective uh, counter to the champions of Israel and Zionism. I mean, this is really the problem that I always had. That when people talk about the Jews this and the Jews that, is that okay, fine, you're always going to find really obnoxious Jews, and but the chances are you're going to find a lot of Jews on the other side. So just like if you say, oh well, whatever cause um, you identify, whether it's abortion or whether it's pornography, and we'll say, oh look at all these Jews, they're supporting abortion. Oh, look at all these Jews who support or even finance pornography. Okay, terrible. Really obnoxious. But then it won't be very difficult to find Jews who are in favor of restrictions on abortion, who are basically in favor of restricting pornography. So that's why it's the just simply blaming the Jews doesn't really get you very far. It's just not a it's not a particularly effective argument. It's a nice idea if it were true. But if it were true, then you could say, okay, well, that's it. We've identified the bad people, and that's it. But the problem is you haven't identified the bad people, because you're going to find the same people are on the other side, and in fact, very effective advocates on the other side. Um, um, so anyway, Vic Shakapopoulos. Dear George, given your biography, would you consider yourself Hungarian, Russian, Jewish, British, or what Stalin would call a rootless cosmopolitan? That's a very hard question to answer. A rootless cosmopolitan, I kind of like that idea, but I hate the idea of being a rootless cosmopolitan. I mean, even if somebody said, you come across as a rootless cosmopolitan, I would say, okay, well, I can probably see what you mean by that, but um, I don't want to be a rootless cosmopolitan. I don't want to be identified as a rootless cosmopolitan. So I would be upset if people thought of me in that way. Um, Funnily enough, I mean, if when you put those, list those things, I would probably say, and you may be surprised by that of all of those, um, those characterizations, I'd probably say I was British. I probably would identify as British um, in that, even though I haven't lived in Britain now for quite a number of years. But yeah, but I like I like the English language. I like English literature. Um, I like I like the English countryside. I like English music. Um, and I it's in a way it's like, what do I feel most nostalgic about? When I get nostalgic, it's nearly always about England. My memories of England. So I lived for many years in New York. I don't really get nostalgic about New York. I barely think about that. Um, and I, again, though I was born in Hungary and spent some early years of my childhood in Hungary, I don't particularly identify with Hungary, because I think I spent most of my life elsewhere, and I grew up again in England. So I would say, if you think, well, what am I as I identify as British. The problem is that I don't think the British accept me as one of their own. They just don't. Whenever I meet anyone from Britain, they never really think of me as a fellow countryman. They just, however much I may speak with an English accent, they don't identify that as an English accent. Um, so that would be how I would think of myself. You know, British for for what it's worth. Anyway, thank you for that question. Baker, W. Baker, thank you so much for the Bane Hounds. 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius here in Barmer today. Well, congratulations. That's really nice. Thank you. 70 Fahrenheit. That's nice. I like it when people give me temperatures in Fahrenheit. If you just said 21 Celsius, I'd be scratching my head and thinking, well, okay, now let me convert this into Fahrenheit, because I think in terms of Fahrenheit. That's what I mean. Like why I think of myself as British, because I still think about Fahrenheit, and I think about pounds and ounces, even though the British have long abandoned pounds and ounces. They've abandoned miles, and they talk about kilos and kilometers and meters and all the rest, and even talk about in Celsius. But I don't. I still it's a part of my nostalgia. I still remember the Britain, the pre decimal Britain. That's a long time ago. Anyway, Marx 2023. George, I read that the technology sector in China scores 57 out of 64 in world tables. I also read that American debt is being dumped all over the world, with most notably Japan, who are now buying Chinese debt. Japan is now in an inflation crisis. Well, I mean, you always say this, and we always have this discussion, and I'd say that the proof of the pudding is that the Chinese are petrified of what the Americans can do to them. I mean, I think because the American economy is just so much more powerful than the Chinese economy, and that's why we saw whenever China, the actual threat that China would challenge America's global predominance, the Chinese have said no, absolutely not. We don't want to go down that path. We're not going to do it, and don't want to do anything at all to upset the Americans. Um, so rather than rehash that, I mean, I just simply say that there really isn't any rival to the United States at the moment. I mean, it's sad for me to look at it, but um, how do we bring this war in Ukraine to an end? Well, it depends on the United States. The United States alone has the wherewithal to bring it to an end. How do we bring the war in Gaza to an end? Only the United States can do it. Not China, not Russia, not Brazil. I mean, you remember the time when the Chinese came up with a Ukraine peace plan? No, you probably don't. I mean, I don't think anyone remembers the Chinese peace plan. But it was with great pomp. The Chinese came up with their peace plan. It went nowhere. When it comes to the Middle East, no one's even attempted to come up with a peace plan, a Middle East peace plan of their own. There's no Russian Middle East peace plan. There's no Chinese peace plan. No Brazilian peace plan. Only the United States can bring those wars to an end. So that's why ultimately, with all the talk about multipolarity and we're not living in a multipolar world. I mean, as of yet, maybe down the road this will happen, but we are living, unfortunately, still in the unipolar world. Only the United States can get things done, and if the United States doesn't, as happened in the Biden years, the United States is not willing to exert itself, then nothing's going to happen. There's not going to be any Russian peace plan. There's not going to be a Chinese peace plan. There's only the Americans can do it. And anyway, Danuki, British PM Starmer announced that the UK would deploy troops to Ukraine. The only response to Putin is force. We will deploy our forces in Ukraine provided we receive American guarantees. I love it. I love it. It's the same as with Macron. So you first of all make this declaration: we will deploy our forces in Ukraine. The only response to Putin is force. We will deploy our forces in Ukraine. Great, fantastic. When's that going to happen? Tomorrow? And said, we will deploy our forces when provided we receive American guarantees. So that's it. That's it. They can only do it if the Americans guarantee it. That's what Macron was saying. So in other words, all the big talk, all the bluster, it's all beside the point, because without the Americans, they're not going to get themselves in harm's way. They're not going to get themselves shot at by the Russians without without American backup. And George, who cares what Trump thinks? America has lost the war. Nothing can change the outcome. Well, America hasn't lost the war. I mean, um, America hasn't lost a single person. This is war. Hasn't lost a single person. Russia has. Russia has lost. I don't know. But let's say I'll give the most conservative estimate. Let's say, 80,000 killed, and then whatever, 160,000 wounded. So I think that's the most conservative. I'm not buying the huge numbers, but so I'm going to give that one. What the United States has shown is that they can keep a war going. What the United States, what the Europeans have shown, that they can keep a war going and inflict huge losses on someone else. That's not losing a war. That's not losing a war. I mean, that's the problem. At the moment, as I said, if the war comes to an end now, Russia will have accomplished very little. They don't control the four oblasts. They haven't accomplished any kind of a new Helsinki security architecture, all that Putin wanted. So to say America lost, is a very strange way of thinking. I'm sorry, but if everyone should lose that way. You put in your forces. You're making money because Americans are making money by producing these weaponry, and somebody else is doing the dying. Americans don't have to do it. That's not a bad deal, and they're inflicting huge losses on the Russians. Now, I think that's a terrible policy, and I think it's horrible and immoral and cynical. But you can't say that they lost. Now, why has Trump adopted a different policy? Not because they lost, not because America lost anything, but because Trump doesn't think Russia is any kind of a threat to the United States. He's never thought that. But he does think that China is a long-term threat. That's Trump's view. And so he thinks that it makes sense for America to patch things up with Russia and try to, if not rope in Russia as an ally against China, at least use Russia, work for Russian neutrality. In other words, don't help China against us. Don't provide any help to China. Let us deal with China without you getting involved, which I think is Trump's view. And incidentally, China hasn't done much for Russia either. So in other words, I don't think if Russia says we're not going to get involved, we're not going to do much for China, it's only reciprocating what China has done for Russia in the Ukraine war. That's why the United States now has changed its policy from the Biden years. There's nothing to do with losing or whatever, but because there's a new strategic priorities. Trump had very different strategic priorities. He's never thought Russia was a threat. Never thought that America had any reason to fear Russia. He does and did think that about China, and says that's it. Let's bring this thing to an end. This is a stupid war. So anyway, Mark Starmer announced an increase in military spending, 2.5% of GDP from 2027. 2027. Russia's been warned. Yeah, 2.5%. That's not going to be very, very impressive, because you know, uh, Trump is talking about 5%. So that's a long way from 2.5%. Anyway, Marty, Merry Tuesday, George and Gagglers. Good to see you, Marty. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Judy Hotchkiss, always good to see you. Thank you very much for your generosity. And Marty, also thank you so much. Always so kind of you and so generous. So Judy says, yes, W. Baker, sovereign control of the dollar is the necessary next step. Treasury Secretary Besant said last year we are going to have some kind of a grand global economic reordering, something on the equivalent of a new Bretton Woods. And Trump's 2020 Fed nominee wrote a proposal for a new Bretton Woods. Yeah, she did that. Well, I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, I think that they may well go for something like that. I mean, it's, reordering it. I think Trump would certainly like that. I have to wonder how they're going to do it. I mean, why they would think that a new Bretton Woods would be more successful than the old Bretton Woods. And again, Judy, if you looked at that book, I posted it on Gaggle, on our locals page, by was it Jeffrey Garten, about whatever it is, five days in Camp David, or was it three? I don't know, maybe 3 days in Camp David. But I mean, why did the United States walk away from Bretton Woods? Well, they couldn't do it. I mean, that system was unsustainable, and the United States was pursuing huge budget deficits and huge trade deficits, and ultimately, the debt was going to come due, and ultimately those who were holding dollars around the world. I mean, that was America could do it. America, with its reserve currency, America could keep its dollars in the central banks of other countries, as long as the central banks of other countries were convinced that the dollar was as good as gold. But the only way that they could believe that the dollar was as good as gold was if the United States was not running an inflation. But the United States was running an inflationary policy, and it started running it during the 1960s under Lyndon Johnson with the Vietnam War and the Great Society programs at home. It started inflation, and so they, all the holders of dollars, did so the value of their holdings was going to collapse, and so they started exchanging those dollars for gold. That's nice, gold. That's a steady source of value. And you began to get more and more of a crisis, and that's why Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, because of inflationary fears. So if you were to do the Bretton Woods again, and I agree with you, Judy. I think that I think Trump and Besant probably would like to establish a new Bretton Woods. You're still going to have the same problem. You're going to have inflation. You're going to have these massive deficits, and you're going to have another run on the dollar. People are going to say we're going to purchase gold. So I don't know how the new Bretton Woods will get away from the problems that ultimately destroyed the old Bretton Woods. But anyway, thank you so much, Judy, for the link to the to Judy Shelton's books. thank you, and thank you for your for your generosity as always. And Danuki, Steve Bannon on the Ukraine mineral deals, walk the fuck away. Yeah, I heard him when he said that. Yes, I think being very honest about it. I think absolutely right. That's exactly the right way to do it. Um, and Mark says, "Well, it's all that is nonsense." Whether it's nonsense or it's not nonsense, the issue is, will Trump be persuaded to sign on to this, and in thinking that there's money to be made in Ukraine, and there is money to be made. I mean, like, as I said earlier, let's not get bogged down on this thing about rare earths. There's nothing about rare earths in this in the document. As I read it out, it was about hydrocarbons. It's about extraction of minerals. In other words, it's about ports, infrastructure. These are vast projects that the Americans plan to invest in. Now, whether they're going to make money on it or not going to make money on it, that's a different issue. But if Trump believes that there's something that he can make some money there, then I think it's going to be a disaster. I think that means the Americans get sucked into Ukraine, and that means the war goes on. It just that means, again, Trump had made the effort to extricate the United States, and he just got sucked back in through this deal. I think that's the problem. Um, 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 so anyway, Kick 567. China's history proves to be a common approach, avoiding war by all means. Trump never started a war and will do business with China and Russia, and even so. Yeah, no, I mean, I tend to think that, except that I think he does see China as a serious, a long-term strategic threat to the United States. What that amounts to, how you deal with the China problem, because you don't deal with the China problem by military means. So that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is that is Iran, and I don't know how Trump intends to play that, given the extent to which he's identifying himself with Israel, and we know how preoccupied Israel with Iran. So the more he identifies with Israel, the more he can get sucked into some sort of a war against Iran. I don't know if that's going to happen, but again, that's another danger. But either way, if you think of Iran and you think about China, clearly Trump thinks that they are more. They're more adversarial to the United States than Russia is. He's never had any of the phobias about Russia. He's never had any of the obsessions about Russia that bedevils the U.S. foreign policy elite. That's why he's always wanted to have good relations with Russia, and that's why his instinct is, let's bring this thing to an end. But as I say, all sorts of traps along the way, and it's not going to be that easy to walk away. I agree with Bannon. Walk away. Walk away. Don't look back. Just simply cut them off. If the Europeans want to continue with this war, then hit them. Hit them with the tariffs. He likes tariffs. Hit them with the tariffs. Don't even say, oh well, you go ahead and do what you want in Ukraine. Don't even do that. Just simply hit them with tariffs and say, get with the program. We're bringing this war to an end. And Mark says, George, no way are the Russians bringing the SMO to an end, not until they capture the Russian lands they've already annexed. Letting America EU into Ukraine for commodities, as that would leave Russia in a worse security situation. Well, it's easier said than done. They've had 3 years of it. So maybe, that's going to be the view. I don't get the impression the Russians want to go on with this, or the Russian people want to continue fighting this war for another 3 years. Um, and I'm kind of somewhat skeptical that they're going to just continue fighting, because at this rate, this could go on for a long time. So so that's why I'm a little skeptical. Oh, they're going to continue and so on. I think that if Trump can cajole everybody, the Europeans and Kiev, to a deal, I think the Russians will take this opportunity, because if they don't, then not only does the war go on, but these uncertainties. There's going to be a lot of uncertainties in the future. You don't know how Trump will respond in frustration, because so even in his first term, he was unpredictable in how he responded. And so that's always very dangerous. The longer a war goes on, it becomes more and more dangerous, particularly if there's a nuclear confrontation. Anyway, Anne-Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for your generosity. And thank you, Anne-Marie, for posting that music of Astor Piazzolla. Really, really, really moving. It's a kind of a tribute to his father. And I wasn't really familiar with that piece of music, but it's a really, really moving. It's unlike other works of Piazzolla, and I'm very fond of him. So thank you so much for posting it. I think it's. I urge everybody to listen to that. It's a really, really interesting piece of music, and to listen to the Arensky's music that I posted for this week's music club. So the Astor Piazzolla was in reference to the last week's music club. So, but this week it's Arensky, and he's not that well known as a composer. I think he was a very good composer. I mean, the Russians produced a lot of very good composers. So, to listen to that again, it's a string quartet. It's a very complex and very again very moving experience, a listening experience. It's a tribute, like it was a tribute to Tchaikovsky, who was Arensky's mentor. But really, really well worth listening to. So please look at that, and read Jeffrey Garton's book. I think 3 Days at Camp David, about the decisions that led to Nixon taking the dollar off the gold standard. So, but Anne-Marie, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward, when you get around to it, to read your thoughts about Arensky and that the string quartet. Janaki says Boris Johnson endorses the Trump-Ukraine minerals deal, comparing it to Lend-Lease for Britain in World War II. He says it will ensure long-term U.S. funding for Ukraine and contains provisions Putin will never accept. That's what I mean. That this is, when you get people like Boris Johnson urging this deal, not to mention Lindsey Graham, who was an early proponent of signing some kind of a minerals deal with Ukraine, that this is not a good idea. This is not going to end well. They know exactly what they're doing. They're trying to rope Trump in to some kind of a commitment to Ukraine, just like he's saying, "Oh, we're going to take the oil. Take the oil." I remember Trump. His position on Afghanistan, the one that he's talking about now, though that wasn't the view that he took during his first term, was that the United States should have stayed on and kept the Bagram Air Base. So according to Trump, then he hasn't walked away from that somehow the United States should still be in Afghanistan, holding on to the Bagram Air Base. I don't know, and so that's why it's always, very troubling when somebody says to him, "Hey, there's money to be had here," and whatever. and we know why Boris Johnson and Macron's also very excited about this deal. They say, hey, this is this is a way to get Trump interested in the fate of Ukraine. This is the way we can get him to commit himself to Ukraine's security. I don't know if he will, but that's what they're thinking about. Um, and so and then anyway. So let's see if there's anything else. Um, yeah. Essie Dillendummer says, "I'm glad to hear George praising Bannon. I've mixed feelings with Bannon. I mean, he's an interesting figure. And then, as I say, this was a good, very succinct way of putting it. I think, I couldn't have put it better myself when he said, "Walk the fuck away from this deal." I mean, he knows Trump. Again, if there's anyone who knows Trump well, that's Bannon. So when he says "walk the fuck away," he says he's really afraid that this deal is just going to suck Trump into Ukraine. Um, so, and then was it Misty says, which film of Tarkovsky had a field with an abandoned tanks? Not sure. Like a vision of war. Russia needs healing. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think that you have to be realistic and say, that everybody wants a war to end. That this war has been going on 3 years. That's a lot. And so, the idea that we're just going to go on for another 3 years, that's just not the way people think. Anyway, I think my time is up. So thank you very much. Danaki says Axios says the deal has been reached. Yeah, I saw that in the Financial Times. We're also saying the deal has been reached. What I read out earlier was that was the draft of the agreement. Anne Marie says, I saw Bannon do a Hitler salute. I think he's really creepy and dangerous. I did see that. That was a very strange. That was a very strange thing that he did, and it was. I don't know if that's a Hitler salute. But it was a strange gesture because he just apropos of nothing kind of raised his arm and then dropped it again. I don't know what he was trying to do by doing that. So. That anyway. But the deal has been reached. I imagine the deal is very close to the draft that I read, because that was it. Anyway, Pero says, Georgia, movie and music question. Have you seen A Complete Unknown yet? No, I haven't seen it. And what do you think about Dylan's music? Just saw the movie. That's why the question. I don't know. I mean, he's not my thing, to be honest. He's not a, it's not. I can't get enthusiastic. I know a lot of people get enthusiastic about Dylan, but it just doesn't really do anything for me. So, I don't want to say negative things about him because I think a lot of people swear by him, and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or anything like that. But it's just not my thing. But thanks for the question. Anyway, my time is up. So thank you everybody who joined us. Thank you for all your very interesting questions and comments and criticisms. Always very much appreciated. Thank you above all those who have put money into the tip jar, because you know what happens on Wednesday. I have to go cap in hand to those really bad-tempered hounds who always blame me for everything, and
who are always unimpressed by my performances. So I have to explain to them, well, this is what happened. I did my best, and just I'm going to try and do better in future. It's never easy. But anyway, thank you everybody who contributed. Really appreciate it, and we'll be back on Thursday, the same time. Look forward to seeing you then. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.